You watched people you trusted become witnesses for lies. You felt the room change temperature before anyone said your name out loud. You protected them, covered for them, softened your words for them. And now you are the villain in a story built from whispers. You think your next move should be to explain, to defend, to clear your name, to force truth into the ears of people who already chose a narrative. That instinct is exactly why the trap closes. They do not want clarity. They want a scapegoat. They want your panic. They want your need for fairness. And if you found this now, at the precise moment the herd is circling, this is not random. This is the fork in the road. Either you keep begging for re-entry into a group that fed on your usefulness, or you learn Machiavelli's Black Swan defense and become the one creature the mob cannot predict, cannot bait, and cannot break. That is the truth you were never taught. You were taught that groups are moral, that consensus means correctness, that being liked is proof of virtue, that explaining yourself earns justice. But Machiavelli saw what most people spend their whole life denying. Crowds are unstable, alliances are transactional, and public opinion is often nothing more than fear wearing the mask of certainty. The system needs you cooperative. It needs you overexposed. It needs you desperate to be understood by people who benefit from misunderstanding you. That is why your first impulse during a smear campaign is almost always the wrong one. So ask the forbidden question: what if the group did not turn against you because you did something wrong, but because you finally stopped being easy to exploit? What if the moment they call you cold is the moment you stopped bleeding on command? What if the reason the toxic family turned vicious, the workplace mobbing intensified, the friends went silent, is not because you became worse, but because you became less available to feed the machine? The mob does not hate you because you are evil. They hate you because you stopped playing your assigned role. In this video, you are going to understand the dark psychology of exile in a way that changes your nervous system. You are going to see why the smear campaign needs your reaction to survive. You are going to learn the manipulation defense hidden inside strategic isolation. You are going to understand the power dynamics that govern every herd, every office clique, every toxic family, every circle that pretends loyalty while feeding on sacrifice. And by the end, you will know the Machiavellian strategy that turns public rejection into private supremacy. Not revenge theater, not emotional collapse, not pleading, a colder thing, a cleaner thing. A Black Swan defense. If these ideas resonate with you, hit that subscribe button for more top-tier content. Also, drop a Black Swan in the comments so I know you're ready. Let's dive in. The first thing you need to understand is brutal. You were never betrayed by a group that truly knew you. You were punished by a group that had assigned you a function. Maybe you were the listener. Maybe you were the reliable one. Maybe you were the one who cleaned up emotional messes, absorbed tension, offered resources, stayed diplomatic, stayed useful, stayed soft. That role was rewarded for one reason only. It served the structure. The moment you introduced a boundary, a standard, a refusal, a new level of self-respect, the structure read it as rebellion. This is why the attack feels so irrational. You are not just facing disagreement, you're facing a system trying to restore order. In dark psychology, this is one of the oldest manipulation patterns in existence. A group stabilizes itself by selecting a target. The chosen target becomes the container for everyone else's insecurity, envy, guilt, and frustration. In power dynamics, this is efficient. One villain creates instant unity. One scapegoat gives mediocre people a burst of moral superiority. One smear campaign allows cowards to feel heroic without ever confronting their own emptiness. Look at how it happens. In a toxic family, the person who stops tolerating disrespect becomes difficult. In workplace mobbing, the competent person who stops flattering incompetence becomes arrogant or not a team player. In a friend group, The one who stops subsidizing everyone's chaos becomes selfish or changed. Same structure, different costumes. The accusation is never the point. The role correction is the point. That is why your pain is so sharp. Not because they invented something convincing, but because some part of you still believes goodness should have protected you. You still believe the history should matter. You still believe the favors should matter. You still believe the truth should matter automatically. But in corrupted power dynamics, history is erased the moment it stops serving the current hierarchy. Your years of loyalty become irrelevant the instant your independence threatens the emotional economy of the group. The mob does not hate you because you are evil. They hate you because you stopped playing your assigned role. Read that again, inside your own memory. Think of the exact day the tone changed. Was it when you said no? Was it when you stopped chasing? Was it when you became less emotionally available? Was it when you succeeded? Was it when you got harder to control? Why do you think the hostility intensified the moment you became less profitable to them? Why do you think your silence now terrifies people who once claimed they only wanted honesty? This is the first fracture in the illusion. The smear campaign is rarely about punishment for wrongdoing. It is usually punishment for disobedience. That is the recognition stage, and recognition turns pain into anger, because now you can see the architecture. You can see that your kindness was not misunderstood. It was budgeted, it was expected, it was consumed. But the smear campaign relies on one specific psychological trick to work. If you do not see this trick, you will spend months feeding the very machine that is trying to erase you. Machiavelli's warning was not poetry, it was engineering. He who builds on the people builds on mud. Mud looks solid until the weight arrives. Mud gives the illusion of support until pressure reveals its true nature. A crowd can praise you on Monday, doubt you on Tuesday, condemn you on Wednesday, and call it moral consistency by Friday. That is why building your peace on group approval is one of the most expensive mistakes a person can make. Here is the psychological trick the smear campaign uses. It forces you into the defendant's posture. The moment you enter that posture, the mob wins a hidden advantage. You are no longer living your life. You are responding to their frame. You are answering their allegations, managing their emotions, chasing their version of events, and measuring your value by their willingness to restore it. That is not truth-seeking. That is captivity. A lie unchallenged does not become the truth. It becomes a trap for the liar, but only if you understand how to stop feeding it. Most people hear that and immediately make a dangerous mistake. They assume it means passive surrender. It does not. Machiavellian strategy is not passivity. It is refusing to spend premium energy on low-level bait. It is deciding where precision matters and where presence is a subsidy. In a smear campaign, the lie survives on oxygen. The oxygen is your visible distress, your frantic clarifications, your late-night paragraphs, your reactive posts, your need to persuade people who enjoy watching you plead. This is why public defense so often backfires. Every explanation confirms that the accusation got inside you. Every explanation provides new language for the next distortion. Every explanation tells the room this topic has blood in it, and people who live on gossip can smell blood from miles away. The smear campaign is not a courtroom, it is a theater. The audience is not asking what is true. The audience is asking who looks shaken, who looks guilty, who looks desperate, who can be safely abandoned. That is dark psychology in its raw social form. Facts matter, but timing matters more. Truth matters, but frame control matters more. Reputation matters, but not in the childish way people think. Your reputation is not what they say about you. It is the power you hold despite what they say. It is the degree to which your posture remains intact while lesser minds narrate themselves into exhaustion. And this is exactly why Machiavelli matters when everyone is against you. He understood exile. He understood unstable loyalty. He understood that public favor is rented, never owned. He understood that the one who survives political hostility is not the one who begs the crowd to reconsider. It is the one who stops confusing noise with authority. So stop for a moment and calculate the energy you waste on mental trials that never happen in your favor. How many imaginary rebuttals have you delivered in your head? How many screenshots have you stared at? How many times have you rehearsed the perfect message that will finally make them see reason? And what has it produced besides exhaustion? Has your over-explaining created respect? Has your transparency created safety? Has your honesty disarmed people committed to distortion? No, because the herd is not evaluating truth. The herd is tracking permission. The ringleader supplies permission to attack. The weak comply. The opportunists pile on. The silent calculate. The frightened imitate. And all of it sits on mud. Machiavelli learned this in the language of politics. You are learning it in the language of friendships, family systems, office politics, and workplace mobbing. The formula is terrifyingly simple. Stop giving the crowd your center. Once you understand that, the Black Swan defense begins. The Black Swan defense is what happens when you become socially unmanageable. They expected a white swan, graceful, predictable, agreeable, easy to read, easy to herd, easy to shame back into compliance. Instead, you become the anomaly, dark, silent, self-contained, impossible to classify. The Black Swan does not beg the flock for permission to exist. The Black Swan changes the entire visual field simply by refusing the assigned pattern. This defense has one objective: break the mob's feedback loop. A smear campaign needs 3 ingredients. It needs a ringleader, it needs an audience, and it needs your reaction. Remove the 3rd ingredient and the structure begins to starve. Not instantly, not dramatically, but predictably. This is why the Black Swan defense is one of the cleanest forms of manipulation defense available to you. It does not require a counterattack. It requires control. First, you stop emotional broadcasting. No public unraveling. No vague posts. No long stories to mutual contacts. No mass message. No midnight essay trying to clear your name. If there is a material issue that affects employment, legal standing, finances, or safety, handle it once, in writing, with facts, dates, and no emotional leakage. But outside of that, you go cold. You do not perform innocence. You do not audition for sympathy. You do not volunteer explanations to people who already consumed the entertainment. Second, you enter strategic isolation, not lonely collapse, not self-punishment, strategic isolation. That means you reduce access to your mind, your schedule, your reactions, and your wounds. You stop giving casual observers front row seats to your pain. You stop chasing updates. You stop polling the crowd. You stop treating every silence as a puzzle to solve. This is where the biology of exile tries to overpower you, because your nervous system interprets rejection as danger. That is why the Black Swan defense feels unnatural at first. It is a direct rebellion against your conditioning, but the conditioning is exactly what trapped you. The fastest way to destroy a group is to give them absolute silence to choke on. Notice what happens when you do this. The ringleader starts escalating. That is not failure, that is exposure. When you deploy the Black Swan defense, the ringleader of the group will often do the same thing within 48 hours. They will intensify the narrative, recruit harder, probe through third parties, or stage some little morality performance to force you back into motion. Why? Because your stillness terrifies them. A reactive target is manageable. A silent target is unknowable. And in power dynamics, the unknowable always feels larger than it is. This is why you must not break form too early. They want a screenshot, They want a confession. They want an angry reply. They want you to post on social media. They want your voice because your voice gives them material. If you are feeling the urge to defend yourself publicly, stop. You are falling into the trap. The smear campaign is built to convert your pain into fresh evidence. Black Swan energy is different. It says, you do not get my panic. You do not get my explanation. You do not get backstage access to what your betrayal cost me. You get distance. You get opacity. You get one thing only, the consequences of losing access to someone you underestimated. And this is where most people fail, because they confuse silence with weakness. They were trained to think visibility is power. In real Machiavellian strategy, selective invisibility is often greater power. The person who cannot be baited cannot be positioned. The person who cannot be positioned cannot be easily sacrificed. Now understand this with precision. Absolute silence does not mean negligence. It does not mean letting serious damage go unmanaged. It means silence in the arena of gossip and precision in the arena of consequence. Publicly, you withdraw. Privately, you document. Publicly, you become unrewarding. Privately, you become exact. This is where manipulation defense becomes mature. You save messages, you record dates, you preserve timelines, you keep copies, you stop speaking in emotion and start speaking in evidence where evidence matters. In the workplace smear campaign, that may mean one clean written clarification to the relevant authority and then no more theater. In a toxic family, it may mean reducing contact, refusing triangulated calls, declining group ambushes, and responding only to concrete matters. In friendships, it may mean ending the entire process of self-justification and allowing absence to become the answer. A king does not debate the peasants who whisper in the courtyard. That line offends the nice version of you. Good. That version was trained to believe every accusation deserves a hearing. Every misunderstanding deserves your labor. Every critic deserves access to your inner life. But not every voice deserves a response. Some voices deserve starvation. Some people do not want resolution. They want access. They want emotional supply. They want proof that they still occupy space in your head. Strategic silence nullifies that power. And make no mistake, silence is a power move only when it is backed by inner order. Petty, silent treatment is childish. Black Swan, silence is different. It is not performative, it is structural. You are not going quiet so they notice. You are going quiet because the entire theater has been downgraded beneath your investment threshold. That is a completely different energy. One is manipulation, the other is sovereignty. This is why dark psychology matters here. It teaches you to see what your sentimentality concealed. The crowd is not searching for what is true. The crowd is searching for emotional cues. When you display frantic self-defense, they code it as instability. When you remain composed, reduce access, continue functioning, and refuse spectacle, you begin to break their unconscious script. They wanted collapse, they got containment. They wanted confession, they got boundaries. They wanted drama, they got a wall. And now the hierarchy changes. Suddenly the whisperers have to keep producing content without your help. Suddenly the story starts thinning. Suddenly the people who joined for entertainment get bored. Suddenly contradictions emerge. Suddenly the ringleader has to overperform conviction. This is the exact psychological mechanism that causes the mob to eventually turn on the person who started the rumor. Not because the group becomes noble, but because unstable coalitions always need fresh stimulation. Once your silence removes the reward, the same predatory energy looks for a new host. Do not countersmear. Do not threaten. Do not stalk the narrative. Do not lurk for every mention of your name. Do not become a shadow member of their little court. That would still make them your center. The Black Swan defense is not about becoming a more wounded version of them. It is about leaving them with themselves. But there is one more trap, and it is subtler than the open enemy. It comes wearing concern. It comes sounding reasonable. It comes calling itself peace. Do not fall for the peacemaker who reaches out to you. Watch what they are actually doing. Most of the time, they are not bridging peace. They are testing the perimeter. They want to know how hurt you are, how angry you are, what you know, what you will admit, whether you are still controllable, whether they can carry your words back to the group and convert them into new ammunition. The false peacemaker is one of the oldest social probes in dark psychology. They arrive with phrases like, "I just wanted to check on you," or "I hate drama," or "I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding," or "Tell me your side." Your nervous system hears relief. Your loneliness hears possibility. Your old identity hears a chance to restore harmony. But in manipulative power dynamics, that conversation is rarely neutral. It is reconnaissance. So what do? You do not pour out your story. You do not unload your evidence. You do not confess your grief to someone who still eats lunch with the people who buried you. You become brief, calm, and impossible to mine. You answer concrete questions with concrete sentences. You move conversations to writing when necessary. You do not defend your soul to intermediaries. If something specific and relevant exists, they can state it clearly. If they cannot state it clearly, then the conversation is not about truth. It is about fishing. This is where stage 5 begins, and most people are not ready for how painful it is. You will feel grief. Not grief for the group itself, but grief for the image you carried of the group. Grief for what you thought the friendship was. Grief for the family you kept trying to earn. Grief for the workplace you thought would value merit. Grief for the illusion that being sincere guarantees protection. That grief hits hard because it feels like losing home. You will feel an intense moment of grief in stage 5. Here is how to instantly transmute it into cold power. Name the truth. You are not losing a sanctuary. You are losing a dependency on false belonging. You are not being deprived of love. You are being cut loose from a market that priced you below your value. You are not standing outside paradise. You are standing outside a machine that needed your confusion to keep running. Why are you mourning the loss of people who are actively holding you back? That question is not cruelty, it is liberation. Because once you answer it honestly, strategic isolation stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like oxygen. You stop interpreting distance as abandonment. You start interpreting distance as recovered territory. You start noticing how much of your life was spent managing moods, smoothing tension, clarifying obvious things, trying to remain understandable to people committed to misreading you. The false peacemaker hates this version of you. The old you was accessible. The new you is expensive. The old you explained. The new you observes. The old you tried to be acquitted. The new you evaluates whether anyone involved even deserves a seat in your future. That is the deeper Black Swan defense. You're not merely surviving a smear campaign. You are changing the terms under which people are allowed to know you. Now we arrive at the part most people sense but rarely articulate. The mob destroys itself because it was never built on truth. It was built on synchronized appetite, and appetite is unstable. The person who starts the rumor gains temporary status, but temporary status is a hungry god. It always needs more certainty, more outrage, more evidence, more performance, more targets. Eventually, the same people who bonded over your exile begin measuring one another the same way they measured you. This is why the Black Swan defense is so devastating. You are not giving the group a clean ending. You are denying them narrative closure. Without your reaction, the story cannot complete its emotional circuit. Without your pleading, there is less triumph. Without your collapse, there is less entertainment. Without your presence, the group is left with its real foundation: insecurity, rivalry, dependency, and fear. Once that becomes visible, the coalition starts cracking. Your silence also creates a new reality in the minds of observers, not the shallow observers who love noise, the serious observers, the ones who notice patterns, the ones who quietly calculate. They begin to see something the mob cannot admit. You are still functioning, you are still building, you are still moving, you did not disappear, you did not beg, you did not detonate, you did not become a clown in their circus. That creates gravity. In power dynamics, composure under attack is one of the rarest forms of social dominance. Your reputation is not what they say about you. It is the power you hold despite what they say. And now comes the final rule, the one so ruthless most people do not have the stomach for it. Never return to the table that required your humiliation as the price of admission. Read that carefully. Never return. Not because reconciliation is always impossible, but because re-entry into a corrupted structure usually costs more than exile ever did. The group may circle back. The peacemaker may intensify. The ringleader may soften. The crowd may suddenly miss you. But ask the only question that matters. Do they miss you, or do they miss access to your old function? This is where Machiavellian strategy becomes personal architecture. You rebuild where they cannot reach. You put your energy into skill, money, body, discipline, craft, new alliances, selective trust, and inner order. You become so internally organized that the old smear campaign starts looking primitive from a distance. You stop fantasizing about vindication and start constructing leverage. You stop trying to win court in the minds of mediocre people and start becoming undeniable in arenas that matter. That is strategic isolation at its highest form. Not hiding, refining, not running, repositioning, not bitterness, discernment. When the herd hates you, you are finally a threat, precisely because you are no longer available for casual consumption. The black swan is dangerous to the flock for one reason. It proves the pattern was never absolute. So let them gather. Let them whisper. Let them trade screenshots and second-hand certainty. Let them rehearse their little moral opera. As long as you refuse the bait, document what matters, protect what matters, and keep your center off the auction block, the structure turns inward. The same mouths that fed on you will eventually feed on one another, not because you orchestrated revenge, but because unstable people always reveal themselves when deprived of a target. That is the throne they never imagined you would take, not a throne of applause, a throne of non-dependence. You started this in devastation. You thought the mission was to clear your name. Now you see the deeper mission. Withdraw your need. Withdraw your panic. Withdraw your unpaid labor from a system that only loved your compliance. This is not the psychology of healing in the soft sense. This is the psychology of reclaiming command. When everyone turns against you, the ordinary person tries to rejoin the herd. The strategist studies the herd. The ordinary person begs to be seen correctly. The strategist becomes too grounded to be defined by frightened people. The ordinary person thinks exile is death. The black swan learns exile is filtration. That is the journey. From isolated victim to untouchable orchestrator, from raw betrayal to recognition, from recognition to anger, from anger to validation, from validation to permission. From permission to weaponization, from weaponization to invincibility. You do not survive the mob by outrunning its noise. You survive it by understanding its mechanics so completely that its noise loses authority. So remember the forbidden question that changed everything. What if they did not turn against you because you did something wrong, but because you finally stopped being easy to exploit? Once you answer that honestly, the whole event reorganizes itself. The smear campaign becomes an initiation. The exile becomes a purge. The loneliness becomes strategic isolation. The silence becomes power. The wound becomes a perimeter. Let them have their whispers. You take the throne. And this is your challenge now. Do not go back to explaining yourself to people who mistook your openness for weakness. Do not hand your nervous system to the crowd. Do not become an unpaid actor in someone else's manipulation defense drill. Become difficult to access. Become precise. Become cold where cold is needed. Become selective. Become the one who can stand alone without shrinking. Comment, let them burn, if you are done pleading with mud. Subscribe if you are ready to think like an elite strategist instead of a wounded defendant, because this is where betrayal gets translated into power, where dark psychology becomes clarity, where Machiavelli becomes practical, where manipulation defense becomes posture, and where people like you stop asking for permission to exist. To know how to rebuild an impenetrable mind after the betrayal, click the video on screen. See what others miss. Know what others fear. Become who others can't.